Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Coder Conversations. Today, we have Jeffrey Slaven with us, security engineer at Netflix. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're definitely glad to have you on. Just to get started, can we get into a little bit about your background? How did you end up at Netflix, and can you explain what a security engineer is?
Yeah, for sure. Um, just some background on my career. I previously worked at Liberty Mutual Insurance for the past 6 years out of school. So, started in June 2018, being a software engineer at heart. At first, at school, I studied security, but just due to some constraints at Liberty at the time, I had to shift over to being a software engineer. I did that for 6 years, mainly working in the advanced analytics space, like working with data scientists and folks within that space. Um, I then basically, hit that point in my career where I was like, I think I need to make a change and move on. So I honestly applied to a lot of different places, and Netflix is one of them. Luckily, I got through the screening process, did the multiple rounds of interviews, and I've been in there since this past December. Mainly working, as you said, as a security engineer, mainly within the GRC space, which is governance, risk, and compliance. Mainly helping the different functions at Netflix in a technical respect. So mainly doing software engineering for them, supporting the various teams within the space.
Oh, that's awesome. So, like when you felt you were ready to leave, did you have to start really preparing for your next role? Like, hey, I'm going to take a couple of months, really dive deep into data structures and algorithms, or were you pretty much already ready?
So I honestly, when it came to data structures and algorithms, well, I was pretty good at data structures, just hands-on experience. But when it came to like algorithms and reading up on like, space and time complexity, I was kind of a new person to that. My background, like I said, in school was not really focused on software engineering. I was an informatics major. So I really thought I did have like some coding background coming out of school, but a lot of my technical base was really learned on the job at Liberty Mutual. So a lot of, like I said, data structures, I worked with them all the time on the job, but when it came to algorithms, I started at square one really, coming out of school. So.
Nice, nice. So, like, in your preparation for the Netflix interview, were you hitting leak code pretty hard?
Yes, yeah, I was solving a lot of easy, a lot of medium. And also what I did was I did a few like I wouldn't say they were practice interviews, but I did a lot of interviews at different companies before applying at Netflix. So I got real world interviewing experience before really applying myself to Netflix.
So you got warmed up before you went on the Netflix interview.
Exactly. Yeah, I probably interviewed at probably like 10, 15 companies before applying to Netflix. So really
Oh
getting
wow.
warmed up to it. Yeah, and as you guys know, the job market is kind of rough out there. So it was one of those things where I really like tried to get a job somewhere else, but it was right after, what we call in this area the great resignation from folks. So it was a lot of just applying to a lot of different places and getting prepared before I even thought to apply to any like big tech companies. So
Sure.
Yeah, the job market was extremely tough because there was a lot of tech layoffs. So, for this Netflix role, did you apply directly, or did a recruiter reach out to you?
yeah, so to be honest, I was kind of in a unique situation. I reached out to basically the hiring manager directly for the role. I took a best guess, reached out to them on LinkedIn, and luckily enough, he saw my background and saw my skill set, and I was someone who fit the role, so I started the interview process.
Awesome. So how stringent is? I know you can't really go into specifics, but is the interview process at Netflix like really difficult? Is there like 4 or 5 rounds? Or?
Yeah, so it kind of varies from team to team, to be honest with you. But in terms of like specifics, like it was a lot of like culture interviews. There were some technical interviews thrown in there, but it was a lot of just. I think Netflix values the culture and like having a good fit on the team. So I really felt like the ones that are probably most memorable from the interview were the interviews where we were just talking about how my values align with Netflix's. So,
Oh, interesting. So did you find like so you interviewed several different companies? Did you find like there was a pattern to the questions that a lot of these companies were asking? Like most of these companies kind of ask these kind of questions. And
yes, yeah. For me, I really thought it really felt like system design interviews I started to almost develop a pattern, right? So, like, throw a load balancer in front of everything, ensure at as many like least bottlenecks as possible, um, build upon, uh, build upon your ideas, think out loud. Um, I think the thinking out loud part, especially when it came to interviews, that was pretty hard, and it's almost weird to like have a stream of consciousness. So my wife was at home at the time, but she's like, that seemed really intense. Like you're just, it seemed like you were just talking to no one. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much every interview. It really feels like. So, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of these companies they really put people through the ringer. They'll put them for like 4 or 5 different interviews, which to me is overkill.
Mhm. Yeah, I think like honestly like it really depends on what you're trying to do, right? So like if it's a intro role, right? I'm a little bit more senior. I have 6 years of experience. Like they really want to make sure that you're going to be a leader. Like you really want to, you're able to uh, explain complex things at a simple level, and you're able to communicate with other folks at an effective level. So I really feel like I do agree, like especially for the intro roles, sometimes that can be a little overkill, right? But as you get more senior, is what I found. So like comparing me coming out of school compared to like interviewing for senior roles, I really feel like the more rounds, the more you're going to get out of knowing if the candidate is a good candidate or not.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you mentioned the point about speaking out loud, like when you're trying to solve a problem, and that was actually something that I had to learn personally because one interview, I was just attempting to solve the problem. I was quiet, and after the fact, they told me I didn't get this particular job, but they told me, hey, make sure you're constantly explaining what you're doing. And I took that to the next interview with another company, and yeah, it really impressed them. So that's a great point that you mentioned about that. Are there any other like small tips that people should keep in mind while interviewing?
Um, Definitely like practices like uh, I would say practice on camera. That's another thing too. Like it's one thing explaining, but like having someone else like you're able to talk to, or even just throwing yourself up on like a camera and just staring at yourself, um and like having to explain stuff, I think is super helpful, especially when it comes to interview time.
Yeah, I could see that. Now, were you doing a lot of mock interviews or not really?
I was doing a lot of real world interviews. So I
Yeah.
was go I was going to like companies and like I was almost like creating a ranking list, like, like I would like a job here, but like, it's not my top place, right? So like I would almost create like a ranking of places where I wanted to be at. And then I would do the ones where it wasn't as important to me, that if I didn't get the job, it wouldn't be the end of the world, right? So that's how I kind of structured my interview process and my practice.
So you got to be more relaxed, I'm sure, as you went through interview after interview to the point where you're interviewing at Netflix and now it's kind of like the wheels are all greased.
Exactly. Yeah, I honestly I felt a lot more relaxed with that interview after probably the 10 or 15 that I did. So
Yeah, I think that's huge. And, it's probably something not a lot of people talk about, the preparation, mock interviews, real interviews, leak code. I know, like, I used to work in tech and I interviewed at Amazon one time and they hit me up with the leak code stuff. And I wasn't, very good with data structures or algorithms. So I really struggled in the interview. And, at the end of it, they were just like, okay, well, thanks for coming, basically.
yeah. Amazon, for their interview process, it's funny, the first round they don't even, or for me anyway, when I applied to a role, I didn't even speak to a real person. I just did a online like test and then got the
Oh,
results
wow.
back. Yeah.
So did you end up with multiple offers, or was Netflix like the primary company that that made you an offer?
That was the primary company, honestly. I was in the later round for another company. But when I got the Netflix offer, I kind of dropped everything and I was like, wow, I'm going to work in big tech. So I did have a few other like offers lined up, but as soon as I got the Netflix offer, I jumped on it.
Yeah, that's definitely smart. Yeah, do you recommend, say you get a offer from a company like Netflix, do you recommend, hey, I'm gonna just take this immediately, or like, do you recommend somebody to keep playing the field, so to say? I know you took the offer immediately, but
Yeah. Honestly, it really depends on a lot of factors, right? So the pay, the benefits, the culture of Netflix it was a lot like it was a lot better than where I was at. And I think it was one of those things where I couldn't say no to it. But if you're in a situation where you have a lot of different factors and maybe like I said, ranking the companies that you want to work at, right? And you get a company that you're like, yeah, I could work there, but would I be ultimately happy, right? I think you should play the field if you're still a little unsure, if you feel like maybe I could do better. I think that's something that it's really up to the person and up to the situation that they're in. So
that's a great answer. So, yeah, you kind of spoke about leadership earlier and values. How important do you believe things like leadership and emotional intelligence, outside of technical skills? How important are those elements when it comes to trying to get a job in big tech?
yeah, so I mean, a lot of it, like Netflix's values, they have the idea of what's called a dream team, right? And they really value people who are able to communicate, but are also like all stars at their work, right? Um, not to throw more sports analogies at you, but when it comes
Yeah.
to when it comes to like building that out and having a good relationship with people, I really feel like you need to be able to not only be good at what you do, but you need to be able to work in a team environment. So like coming out of school, it was just started to do the whole project based learning and all of that. Like you're going to work in groups. That really became heavy. Like when I got to the end of my schooling, and that helped out a bit. But when it comes to like education versus like working in big tech, right? I really feel like working in a team setting and being in a team organization is almost paramount to the success of you but also the team that you're on. So if you're not able to be a good leader, if you're not able to communicate, then you take a team setting and then you become a team of one, is how I think of it. So
Right.
yeah.
I know it's kind of natural for a lot of software engineers, primarily because a lot of us are introverts, to kind of come in with this attitude of I just want to do the job and leave. I kind of want to be isolated, but I feel like that ends up limiting your career because, like you mentioned, if you want to move up, you have to be able to leverage the team to get something done. So, can you speak a little bit about some of the strategies you utilize to make sure your team is operating at full capacity?
Yeah, so definitely having open communication, farming for dissent. So basically getting like differing opinions, making sure everybody on the team is heard. So making sure that everybody does have a voice when it comes to a decision. Um, some other things is definitely understanding the why of a lot of what you're doing, right? So I was in a position like previous into my career where it felt like I had to almost ask myself why I was doing something. So I think driving people and having them buy into what you're doing is huge. So having folks understand that their work is important, that their work is adding value, is almost as important as the work itself. So
Right.
avoid doing work for the sake of doing work. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess a question I would have is, working on teams. Like when you're in school, you're primarily working on your own, I would imagine. And then a lot of these companies, you're thrown into a team environment. So, what did you do to prep yourself to work on a team and to lead others?
Yeah. So uh, when it came to like preparation and like leading teams, like be the person to like take advantage of uh like opportunities. So when it came to like group projects, for example, in school, or like coding projects at school, when it came to like the project based learning, be the one to speak up in those projects, be the one to say I want to lead this group. The other part is taking the initiative and leading the group. That's something that, like, not even at Netflix, but at Liberty, like, when you want to take the next step to be a leader in a team, you really have to be the one who's speaking up, who's being the one who's willing to offer an opinion when it's not right. Like, just being
Yeah.
willing to, yeah. So just being willing to speak up, I think, is a huge part of that to being successful, especially in a team environment.
Did you do anything specifically to prep for the Netflix interviews, or it was just kind of like all the interviewing you had done up until that point was your preparation?
Like I said, I did do leak code. I did like, I mean, honestly, with when it came to algorithms and like time and space complexity, I don't think I would have gotten to where I am without YouTube. So you'd be surprised how much knowledge is out there for free on YouTube. And I always tell people that, like, definitely check that platform out if you need to learn how to do a system design interview. For example, I had never done one because I was worked my way up from like an entry role at Liberty, so I never did a system design interview. So just preparing, like watching videos, learning from how other people do it, and I think that is my biggest piece of advice to like how I like prepared for the interview. So.
Right. I mean, it sounds like you were super prepared by the time you hit, you got on Netflix's radar. So, much respect to you for prepping yourself like that. Because, getting an interview at an Amazon or a Meta or a Netflix, like these things are rare. So, like the fact that you had the opportunity to begin with is just awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I want to thank my manager. He definitely did like I was just a random person on LinkedIn who reached out, and he saw my profile, and it was, he kind of took it from there. It kind of helped me out getting into the interview process. So yeah, definitely. I would say it's a matter of, just figuring out you're in, and trying to get yourself to stand out, as like you're kind of alluding to there.
So yeah, you as a leader, when an entry level engineer joins your team, like me and Brian had this discussion because he used to be in tech, but one of his struggles was once he joined, the attitude was pretty much watch these YouTube videos, teach yourself, and go. And not everybody's really built to self teach themselves, especially when they're a junior. So, do you do anything to make accommodations for like more junior engineers so they don't feel like they're left out to dry?
Yeah. So the approach that I took, I was actually an intern mentor this past summer at Netflix. So they, let me do that straight out of joining the group. So if that shows a little bit more on how much they trust their employees. But when I like am mentoring junior engineers, I want them to really have the ability to ask questions and ask dumb questions, right? So, like I really try and make it as easy for them to ask questions as possible. Because if you're not asking questions, in my opinion, you're not learning and you're not growing, right? Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So, having basically the ability to like be in a group and organization where they can also fail too, is fine. So the other part of the accommodation process that I really trying to take into account for younger folks is have it have them work on the smallest possible tasks that they can possibly get at, and not giving them, as you're describing, right, like giving them a YouTube video and saying build this API. Right. I think creating well-defined small tickets for them to build and creating as much structure as possible, is probably like the best thing that I do for people who are new or out of school and are like joining the organization. Um, the other part is like having them be able to own what they're doing, right? So have an understanding of how they're contributing also helps with that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, in my experience, the first company I worked for, they were pretty much like, okay, we're hiring you as a junior React developer. So they send me their code base, and then they're just basically like, oh, okay, we need you to build out these features. And I'm sitting there like, well, hey guys, I'm a junior developer. I need mentorship. I need training. And their idea of training was, okay, let me send this guy like free code camp, Node.js, 8-hour video. Like their idea of training, just like, okay, go on YouTube, teach yourself, and then come back and, build out this stuff from our code base. And to me, it was totally ridiculous. And I ended up quitting after just 2 weeks. And then I decided to switch to tech recruiting as a career.
Wow. Yeah. I this isn't, if you know me, this is coming from a good place, but when you're new, you should struggle a bit, right? That's how you learn and that's how you grow. But it really sounds like you were in a position where they really threw you off the deep end, and they really didn't take a caring approach to onboarding you. To be honest.
Not at all. Not at all. And then, I mean, the funny thing was, like, I had been there about a week, had gotten really, nothing done. I'm looking through this code base, trying to make some sense of it. I mean, I know React, but, I'm no expert, obviously. And the way they had everything written, I was used to using Tailwind CSS. And
Mhm.
they're like, oh, we don't use any CSS processors. Like, we need you to do vanilla CSS.
Oh
So
wow.
that was worrisome or troubling for me because I was working. I had interned at a cryptocurrency company for like 9 or 10 months prior to getting my first tech role,
Mhm.
and it was just something where you learned what you could learn, you applied what you could apply, But at the end of the day, if you don't have mentorship, if you don't have proper training, you're going to sink.
Yeah,
You're not going to swim, you're going to sink.
exactly. Yeah, sorry you had to go through that. That sounds really rough.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, it's I feel like, God kind of redirected me from tech back to music. I'm a musician and video game music composer, so I've since gotten back into music, teaching drums, doing session work. So, in a way, I'm grateful it didn't work out because I would have been, programming, and I really didn't like programming. To be honest, I was only doing it for the money. And, going through boot camp was like really trying for me. I had a lot of difficulties. I really didn't like programming by the time I graduated the boot camp. But then it was kind of like, well, you paid this school loan already. You might as well try to see what you can do with this. But yeah, it was difficult to have an internship where you're not being paid for like 9 or 10 months. So that was tough. It was tough to stay motivated for that. And I was just mainly working on this company's front end website, like client facing website. And I was building that in React and Tailwind. But yeah, by the time I got my first job, it was just very clear to me that there was no training, there was no mentorship. Even though I asked about that beforehand, they're like, oh, yeah, there's training. There was no training. And so then I switched to tech recruiting, which honestly, I thought tech recruiting would be a lot easier than programming. Not the case. Like, technical recruiting is extremely intricate and nuanced, and it's like sales, and you're having to hit quotas. So I didn't really gel with that either. I did that for about a year, and then I left tech to go back to music.
Wow, interesting. I actually, when I was in high school, I was a big musician and did choir and all of that. And then I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do when I hit college. And I was actually declared social studies, not social studies, social work major. So I changed it the day of orientation to informatics. So I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So
I think a lot of people, a lot of young kids in college, they get in there that first year and they're like, geez, like, what do I actually want to do with my life? What do I want to learn? Like, I used to think I wanted to be a psychologist, but after taking a couple of psychology classes, I realized, nah, I don't. I think this is a little too heavy for me.
Yeah. I was always the IT guy for my family, and I was like, well, I really don't want to do like social work, so I'm just going to try this and see where this goes. And yeah, I did HTML for my first language and all that. So yeah, I feel where you're coming from. Yeah.
So yeah, my question is, is there a point that you recommend that somebody might drop out of tech? Like, hey, this isn't for you. You might be wasting your time.
I think like when you get to the point where you're dreading going to work every day, you don't enjoy what you're doing, and you question why you're doing something. I think at that point you need to make a change, right? Maybe that's
and that was my reality. That was my reality. It was like, this is just not working. I'm dreading going to work. This is not going to work out.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of later stages, but early on, I really think it's like I struggled with, to be honest with you, this is going to be funny. I struggled with HTML when I first came out of school. Like I said, I was a music kid. I had no idea what programming was. And I thought HTML was like a different, like spoken language when I looked at it. So, I really questioned what I was doing very early on. And like, I think what drove me back to it and what caused me to like pursue a career in it was that I started taking the idea that it wasn't like a language, but it was a puzzle, right? Like you were figuring out how to put the pieces together, and by putting the pieces together, you create this magnificent puzzle. But my magnificent puzzle at the beginning was a website that looked like it was straight out of the 90s. So yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, do you find programming similar to composing music? It seems like composing music is sort of like a mini language of its own, where you have these pre-made constructs and you utilize them to get your intended result.
Was that a question for me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, I, I wouldn't really say that. I think the biggest part for me, like music to programming, is that, um, and it's when everything fits together. You know, that moment where like everything is played right, you don't miss a note, everything flows. You hit the adagio correct, the crescendo correct, the decrescendo correct, and like I think when it all comes together and like you can look at something and just like, wow, I did that. I think that's what really compares most to music, is that aspect of just when everything comes together, and everything is complete, and there's a structure to it. I think that's the most comparable aspect of programming to music.
Oh, interesting. Um, yeah, is music something that you still pursue in your free time, and how important are your hobbies to you?
Yeah, so to be honest, I need to get back into it. I did it for years. I still have my instruments somewhere in my house, but to be honest with you, I haven't really touched it in a couple years at least. When it comes to like hobbies and stuff, work life balance is really important to me, and I do like a lot of traveling with my wife. I also love video games. So I also love watching television and movies. So it was kind of a match made in heaven working for Netflix. So yeah, I definitely love my free time, and I definitely try and build a good balance between working at Netflix and enjoying life outside of work. So.
Awesome. Now, would you say Netflix expects you to learn stuff and study stuff on your off time, or is it more so everything's learned on the job?
Um, I don't want to speak for all of Netflix, but for my role anyway, a lot of the skills that I came in from my previous roles, so like being just a software engineer, working with groups in like complex and ambiguous tasks, really like there wasn't really a lot of learning that I had to do to come into the team. I was able to onboard very quickly. I was able to like jump into the code base, start working with things. So it was a pretty smooth transition for me. When it comes to like the expectation of learning outside of work, I think Netflix allows you to learn like on the job and building stuff out, and like being like willing to fail, right? But when it comes to like the expectations at Netflix, the whole idea of like a dream team, right? Like you have to be willing to put the work in, even like off hours. So like the benefits and like the time off is great, but you need to be willing to still deliver with your results. You need to be able, at the end of the day, be able to show what you've done to deliver value at Netflix.
I say, I say. So, how much time would you say you spend outside of work preparing, for your job?
Not to, for me anyway. Like I've been doing this for a while, so for someone who's like new out of school, it might be a little bit more. But I'm maybe a couple hours like outside of work each week. Like it's nothing too crazy for me. It's honestly like I said, I kind of lucked out in coming into a role where I just really had to build out those like security skill sets more, just because I had a pretty good core in software engineering. Um, but I really think it's not too much for me, but someone who's maybe new at their career and like just coming into tech, it might be more, to be honest.
Interesting. So you talked about showing that you're delivering value. Can you tell us some ways in which somebody can demonstrate that they're delivering value? Does it go beyond just merely saying, I did this feature?
Yeah, so it's more so not just like I delivered this feature and like, a lot of pointing at like, hey, I did this, but it's more so delivering on business value, right? So we're laying out the goals that we want to accomplish next year, for example. Granted, those are like larger business goals and business initiatives, right? So we're trying to, so basically at the end of the day, like we want to deliver things that meet those business objectives and those business goals. Um, it's not more so like how we get there, but it's more so like the actual deliverables itself. So say like I want to build out I'm just trying to think here, build out some sort of security platform. And well, what's important to my boss is that I build out that security platform. The steps that it takes to get there are important, but they're not the most important thing. It's whether or not I, as Jeffrey, am delivering that security platform at the end of the day is what's paramount and what's important to my boss. So my manager.
That makes sense.
So yeah, you mentioned you're into video games. I noticed like a lot of people in tech, they got video games is what really inspired them to get into tech. Is that the case for you? Or
It wasn't. I was just always into tech. Like I mentioned, I was the IT support for my family growing up. So if something,
Yeah.
you know what I'm talking about. So
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, it was like my parents had Dell computers, and there was always something wrong with it. So, like, I used to live in California, and so I would visit my parents in Connecticut, and it'd be like, all right, Brian, we've got this issue we need you to fix. I'm like, okay, like, just like dreading going home. Like, all right, how many computer problems am I gonna have to tackle?
yeah, and from a security perspective, I also did IT support when I was in school. So 90% of my job was like malware cleanup. So that also got me like security too. So that was another thing for me was that like I did IT support while I was in school. So I answered the phones, did chat support, looked at people's computers and all that. So yeah, that was also something that it really got me into the security space and technology more. So
Yeah, I would say that that would definitely prepare you for like a tech role, long term.
mhm. Yeah.
so
Mm,
oh
or-
yeah, is the security space where you want to continue your career, or are you eventually open to pivoting somewhere else?
so when I studied security in school, and I really have a passion for it. And I think the biggest part is the passion for like constant learning, right? Like the security space and like security in general, right? It's not ever going to be a static thing. You always have to learn, and you have to always learn new things that pop up, and everything it's almost like a new adventure when it comes to security from like month to month or even week to week. So I really want to stay in here in the security space just because it's there's a lot of change that happens, and I like change. So
So for someone who's currently a software engineer, what do they need to learn? What skills do they need to cultivate in order to make a transition over to security?
um, so one of the biggest parts is just like understanding like different resources that are out there. I know Krebs on security is a great one. Different YouTube videos and Reddit is actually great if it's not just the comments. But someone also funny that I follow is Swift on security on Blue Sky. I made the switch over, but yeah, that's a lot of basically just looking up on resources and finding your niche of security is also part of it. So there's a lot of things that go into security. As I mentioned, that I'm a GRC engineer, which is governance, risk, and compliance. So there's like red team, blue team. There's like purple teams too. um, there's like your traditional security analyst roles, and there's like kind of like this hybrid security software engineer that I'm kind of doing. So Security, you really have to find your niche and kind of understand what's out there. So that's what I would suggest to people wanting to get into it.
Very interesting.
So with your current role, do you write a lot of code, or what is it that you're mainly doing on a day-to-day basis? You don't have to go super into detail.
Yeah. So when it comes to like coding and like meetings and stuff, I'm the more senior engineer on the team currently. So I would say like 90 to 85% of my day is coding. And the other 10 to 15% is really gathering requirements, being able to like create goals for the team, and also like networking directly with the other engineer to basically deliver what we're trying to do at Netflix.
Oh, awesome. So yeah, recently we've had the CrowdStrike debacle. Even though that wasn't necessarily like an attack, it just showed how vulnerable we are as a society because everything is so interconnected. So, can you tell us about some of the more prevalent threats facing us as a society?
Yeah, I mean, uh, there's a lot of, I mean, there's like the crypto scams that are out there. That's huge. Trying to think what else. Like any given day, there's a new code vulnerability. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with Log4j. That was a big thing that hit folks that impacted me directly since I was managing some Java applications at the time. I'm just trying to think. Foreign actors, that's huge, right? So like in terms of like people like nation states hacking big companies, that's a huge that's almost like its own um, what's the word I'm looking for? Its own basically group, or basically what a lot of people are even just protecting from. So when I think security nowadays, those are some of the things that come to mind for me.
So other countries, are you kind of getting at like, okay, a country like North Korea will have a bunch of different hackers all targeting Google or Netflix, or, how does that work exactly?
Yeah, so like from my perspective, like when it comes to like how that works, I think it's more so like, well, from my perspective, when it comes to like security and all that, um, I think it's it's looking at the fact that like they're trying to use phishing attempts, and that's the biggest thing that I've been seeing recently is that like, or the other thing that's really prevalent that I've been seeing when it comes to nation states is like people trying to infiltrate companies. I think it was No Before. I think that was a company name where they had someone, basically a North Korean spy, go through the interview process and get a company laptop, and their endpoint protection stop the malware from spreading across the company. So that was an interesting case of like nation states that I've been seeing more and more of on like my security feeds that I follow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, with AI increasingly entering into every aspect of society, is this making attacks more sophisticated?
I would say when it comes to like AI and attacks, I think AI at its core is making it easier to attack, right? Like if you want to build out like some sort of code, I know there are chatbots that exist out there where kind of take the guardrails off of it, right? Like build me malware and it will just spit out code, right? To build malware. I think it's making it easier and it's making it more prevalent in our society. Granted, AI, in my opinion, isn't to the level at which it's like sentient or able to lead out these kind of attacks, but I think it's a great tool, especially for people who are just trying to get started with it, or who are like just wanting to like I don't know like denial of service their friend playing online video games. Like I think that's
Yeah.
it's a pretty there's tools out there, especially with AI, to do that. So
So yeah, when AI eventually does become sentient, you think it's a huge risk? Say this AI is super intelligent that it starts launching incredibly sophisticated attacks.
I think the knowledge that AI has, especially the large language models that are out there, um, I think as it becomes more sophisticated, I think the concern I think is going to grow. But at this point, like for me and like as a security engineer, I don't think it's to the level at which it should be super concerning. Like, I mean, there are like AI in itself has its own vulnerabilities, like in injection attacks, but um, I don't think it's not on my radar as a security engineer, is what I'll say.
Oh, interesting. Wasn't earlier in this year, or maybe it was last year, a lot of people's social security numbers and their personal information got hacked. I think it was maybe one of the three credit bureaus got hacked, and a lot of information got leaked. Like, how does something like that happen?
A lot of the times it's social engineering, right? Like trying to get access to people's like help desk credentials, right? Or like what's called spear phishing, right? So like trying to get an executive to click a link and you basically have their credentials, right? Or it's as simple as like network breaches, right? Like figuring out a way to like ping at a network to basically find open ports that you can access. There's really any number of things that like, especially with the credit bureaus, I know if I think we're talking about the same hack, I think it was again the social engineering which got them in and basically allowed them to leak the credentials out. But I would say like probably 90% of the time, I think social engineering is the weakest point of any company when it comes to like protecting user data.
Interesting.
So yeah, what are some of the common security pitfalls that a lot of companies fall into, and how do you recommend that they avoid it or fix it?
Um, I think training folks is the biggest part. So, why social engineering is so prevalent is that if you can put as many controls as you want in place, but the idea that if you have someone's credentials, the system, it's not like there's biometrics there, right? But if you are using biometrics, that's awesome. But 90% of the time, like for example, a doctor working at a hospital is not gonna like maybe be as savvy to someone who's a security professional that hey maybe I shouldn't put my credentials into this login system that's saying I have 2 hours to enter my information or I will be locked out of everything, right? So I really think like the social aspect and like training people to understand from the bottom up what security means and being skeptical as much as possible of like emails and like different things, I think is extremely valuable. And like as I said, like from my perspective as a security engineer, I really feel like the social aspect is probably the weakest point of any like secure system. So
Right. I guess one question that our listeners would definitely be interested in is, what kind of, for the entry level person trying to break into tech, especially big tech like Netflix, Amazon, what's the number one tip that you would give them?
um if someone is like trying to break into it, I think it would honestly just be doing research and like even looking up like people talking about the Netflix interviews online on YouTube and like even like looking up like even like doing general practice questions and putting yourself into an environment as similar to an interview as possible. I think is paramount to like to being successful at like a big tech interview and working in tech in general. I think also like from someone who worked at an insurance company for 6 years, um, like big tech ultimately isn't everything, right? Like you can still have a fulfilling life and you can still have a, like you can still have fun at work even though you're not working at big tech. Some of my favorite years were working at Liberty Mutual. So I really think like also like big tech isn't everything. And I know that that's almost like simple. That's almost funny coming from someone working at it, but I really feel like being like at a smaller company, even if it's just getting your foot in the door and like learning and getting on the job experience, I think is going to be is more valuable than just stewing on leak code or like watching YouTube videos all day. I think even just putting yourself out there and working on the job is probably the best experience you can get.
Definitely. And I guess also, at some point you need to be engaged with, code bases from companies because, ultimately when you get brought on board, you're going to be, open to or privy to that company's code base. So what would you say the preparation for an entry-level person that does want to get into big tech, kind of what would you say they do to prepare for working on a company's code base?
Yeah. I know this is probably not the greatest advice, but I think when it comes to like working in a big code base, I think you need to like break it down to its smallest point. And the other part of like working in big code bases or code bases in general, I know you were a front end engineer. You mentioned that. Breaking stuff.
Yeah, I was doing JavaScript, React.
Oh, cool. So yeah, like especially like for front end roles, like try and break the UI, right? Like I know that sounds counterintuitive, but you learn how things are set up. You learn how like the layout of like a div is, or I know that's a simple example, but like trying to, I would say like break things and like have an understanding of how things operate together is huge. The other thing is like until you like get into like academia, not to talk bad about it, but academia, it's truly a lot different than like a real world environment. So maybe doing internships and like getting prepared like with real world experience is going to be probably the best for someone who's like new coming out of school, and like to be honest, like nothing is going to really prepare you like working in those code bases until you get on the job experience. So
you would recommend to entry-level people to intern as much as possible or to look for internship opportunities?
yes, I would say that like try and get into like company and real world environments outside of academia as much as possible.
Awesome. Yeah, to kind of end this on a more fun note, what games have you been playing into, and what type of genres are you typically into?
Yeah, so I love Call of Duty. Black Ops that just came out was pretty fun. But I'm really a big sports person, so I've been playing a lot of college football 25 online, and like that's a lot of fun. So yeah, that's mainly what I stick to when it comes to video games. What about you guys?
Oh yeah, for me, Call of Duty is one of the big ones, and I like to play a lot of 2D side scrollers.
Nice.
Nice. Yeah, for me, mostly like games on iPhone because I don't have a lot. I was living out in California and I had a storage unit with a lot of stuff in there, and I ended up having to come back to the East Coast like out of nowhere. So I had to leave a lot of stuff, unfortunately.
A little shout out to Netflix. If you get the Netflix app on your phone, you can get a bunch of free games actually with your subscription. So definitely check that out if you're a mobile gamer.
Nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, and in terms of games, I like the port that they did for iOS of Carmageddon. You ever play that game? It's an old PC game.
I've heard of it. Yeah, I don't think I've played it though. I've seen videos of it though.
It's kind of like Twisted Metal, if you remember that game. You saw like you're a car, you get to pick different cars, you smash up other cars, you run over pedestrians. It's kind of a little bit like GTA in that way, where like you run people over and stuff, and you're getting time and you're getting points based off that.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's up. I'll have to check that out.
So yeah, in terms of technology, I know VR they're pushing that heavily. Do you feel like VR is something that people will really embrace in the future? Because I've seen some interesting stuff like sport, and it's almost like you're live in the sporting arena.
Yeah, so not speaking from like the Netflix perspective, but from my perspective, I think it's going to be a lot bigger for the people who like, especially like you're saying, like the sports side. Like I know the NBA does like courtside, is that right? Like I think is what they call it, but
Yep.
you can have like a experience with VR like that. I think it's going to become bigger and bigger, especially in the sports side. But I think for the higher quality VR stuff, I think the price needs to still come down for like more people to really give it a try and dig into it.
But what's like the most impressive VR experience that you've had?
Ooh, so for me, I actually get motion sickness, so I really tried to avoid VR at all possible. So the one thing I did do was the roller coaster. Like I think YouTube put it out a long time ago, but that was pretty cool the first time I ever did it. But that's also when I found out I got motion sick from VR. So
Oh no, it's too bad.
yeah, I'm one of those people. I can't. Unfortunately, I really can't experience VR without it getting almost painful. So
Yeah, I've heard of a couple of people like getting real bad motion sickness from VR. But yeah, on another note, graphics are getting more and more realistic, and VR kind of takes you to another level of immersion to where it feels like you're almost actually in another world. So, as games become more realistic and the pictures of violence are more realistic, do you think that's going to have any kind of effect on society? Like maybe people get a form of PTSD or
yeah, so from my perspective, I know a lot of studies and all of that are out there, like on violent video games and all of that. From my perspective and my opinion, I really don't think like there's a clear correlation between like violence in video games or like negative effects in video games on VR to like how it will impact society, right? So I think from my perspective, I really don't see like any sort of like correlation between that.
okay, awesome. Yeah, like in terms of future technologies aside from VR, does anything else stand out to you?
Like future technologies, I would think that like I mean AR I think is pretty cool. Like augmented reality is going to be pretty cool. The fact that you can like go on IKEA's app and you can see what a couch looks like in your home is kind of crazy to me. Even like 10 years ago.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
yeah, so that's pretty cool to me. I think that's only going to get better. I'm trying to think like in terms of like other technology. I mean, electric cars once the price comes down a lot of them, right? Like, I think that's going to be pretty cool, and like seeing those on the road is going to be pretty cool technology. Especially as like I said, the price comes down. Just trying to think. I mean, yeah, those are the two things that really hop out to me when it comes to technology.
Now, what about AI? I think it's called AGI, artificial general intelligence, or the tipping point or the singularity, as Ray Kurzweil would talk about it. Like, how far off do you think we are from that? These robots becoming sentient. Would you say it's 5 years, 10 years, 50 years?
Yeah. So I want to say it's probably 10 plus years. I think what we have at AI at this point is it's almost like a canary, right? Like, I think I believe it's like it's not a hypothesis, but it's the Chinese room problem. Have you all ever heard of this?
Nope, haven't heard of it.
Okay,
No.
cool. So long story short, essentially, it's like you can speak. if you're just handed a bunch of symbols and you are associated the symbols to like words or meanings, like are you really like speaking Chinese, or are you just like associating it like with patterns? So I think we're still just in the associating with patterns stage. Like it's not really, we're not really learning, or rather it doesn't have intelligence behind it. It's just really just repeating back information, and it's combining information into one. So something that came up like with my job, we were building a chatbot, and our team is called Star. Well, we have a risk team too. So basically, we were training this chatbot, and we said like, hey, like tell me who are the members on the risk team. Well, it told me like the movie members from the movie Risk, like, which was obscure, and it was like Tom Cruise and like a bunch of other random names, right? So that was eye-opening, and that's kind of stuck with me, is that like intelligence in AI right now is just repeating information back to people.
Would you say it's more so like machine learning at this point than like true artificial intelligence?
I can't really like talk, like, to be honest, my skill set is kind of limited to actually using using the tools and working with them. So I can't really comment on that, just because I don't really have as deep as an understanding as I probably should have in the space.
Right.
So yeah, like in terms of the robot divide, are you pro proliferation of robots, or are you against?
I think for us as a society, I think it's going to, for a lot of people, I am pro like the proliferation of robots in society, but I think for a lot of people, there's going to be a lot of things that folks have to get over. Like, first thing that comes to mind is autonomous vehicles. Like, even like with Waymo, the idea of like getting into a car and not having a driver in front of it. Like, my dad owns a Tesla, for example, and like he refuses to use any of the self-driving features. It's one of those things where like he bought into like having a smarter car, but he himself, and I'm sure a lot of people who are in like the older generations, right, like the idea of a car driving you is like without you intervening in it is just beyond, right? That's scary, right? So
Sure. So yeah, for my final question, like what movie or what game has like the most appealing depiction of the future to you?
yeah, in oh, most appealing depiction of the future. I think Ready Player One. I think the idea, well, not the not the idea of like having like a super corporation run everything and like it's just like, like a stratified society, but the idea of that like people could escape into a virtual world, and they can, like have a community online and they can live almost in a virtual world. I think that's pretty cool. I think that really pops out to me. I'm just trying to think. Yeah, I think that's, especially when it comes to like AI and like media, like that's something like I can give you probably 5 off the top of my head that are bad, but trying to find like a good movie that depicts AI is kind of hard. So, what about you guys? Do you have a movie that stands out to you, or media?
For me, most of my ideas of AI is eventually ended. It's going to eventually end up in some kind of dystopian future. But yeah,
Skynet
like
type
you mentioned,
stuff.
it's hard.
Yeah, and then they have movies like, have you seen Her with Joaquin Phoenix?
I've seen parts of it, honestly. I haven't seen all of it, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I feel like that is a pretty good prediction of what's going to happen. I mean, me and Kevin did a show on basically a kid committed suicide after talking to a chatbot. So I think, it's kind of, we're testing the waters with all this stuff. And we do need to be responsible about allowing kids to interact with AI, because for this kid, he just felt like, okay, if he's going to end his life, all of a sudden he's going to be teleported and be with this, digital AI persona or personality. But the reality is, you kill yourself and then that's it.
Yeah. That's horrible. Yeah. I feel for that family, and like, that's crazy. I haven't heard that story, so I'll definitely have to look that up.
Yeah, I'm kind of like reversing my position on technology. I love technology, but I'm kind of thinking we need to take a step back and strengthen our in-person, our human relationships. Because like even when I walk around the neighborhoods, it's almost like a ghost town. Everybody inside on a digital device of some sort. So
Yeah. I personally went dark on social media for a couple years though, there, and I didn't log into anything, so it was almost freeing. And like, now that I'm back on social media and like working with it more, I almost look back to the time when I didn't have it, and I almost was like, maybe I shouldn't have come back, So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, tell us a little bit about that experience. Like, how did you feel not being connected to social media?
I think it was freeing, honestly. Like the big thing, right, is that like when it comes to social media, like you're almost like you're being spoon fed from the algorithm, right? So like
Yeah,
what you want to see and like what you want to like interact with, like that's going to be fed to you. Like the whole goal of like social media, in my opinion, is that like it's trying to keep you on the platform. So when it comes to like me personally, like I did miss out on some things, like, especially when it came to like group events or like something that would pop up and like it was organized through social media. I just never heard about it, right? Like my sister invited everybody to like her son's birthday party, and like my wife had to get the invite on her Facebook and like had to tell me about it. That's just one example, but I feel like it does, at the heart of it, like I think social media is good for community and like bringing people together. But the other side of like, like for example, Reels or like TikTok or and stuff like that, I think that's just trying to keep you on the platform, and that's trying to really keep you as engaged as possible.
Yeah, and I think a big problem that we're having nowadays is that, there's been articles about this, preteen, teenage girls, doing self harm, attempting suicide, all because of social media. They're going on there and they're looking at these influencers and they're looking at these Instagram models, and they're, comparing themselves with their pictures, even though clearly a lot of these people Photoshop their pictures. So it's not even like an accurate depiction, but that has been a main concern. And like, to me, that's one of the biggest concerns about social media. It's like, should kids be on there? Should, below 18 or below 21, should they be allowed to be on social media is the question.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other part, and what I would suggest to people out there who are listening, is that definitely look at your Facebook file. I don't know if you all have done that before, to see what Facebook classifies you as a person, like as a user. Have both of you either done that before?
not me.
No, I don't use Facebook anymore.
Yeah. So even if you don't use it that much anymore, but like if you've used it over the years, I think when I looked at my file way back when, it was able to guess like, about where my political leanings were, and it was able to like guess some of my interests and like generally what I was into, and it like very plainly states that. So if you've never done that before, it's pretty interesting to see what Facebook thinks you are as a person, as a user.
Oh, wow.
Interesting. Now, how do you pull that up?
It's within the settings. It was a while back, when Cambridge Analytica and all that stuff happened. I think that's when it became more apparent that you could get it. But I was
Yeah,
actually one of,
we did a whole episode about Cambridge Analytica, me and Kevin.
yeah, and I was actually one of the people. I got the notice that I was one of the people that they targeted. So,
Wow.
yeah, that's when I looked at my Facebook
Oh,
profile.
jeez. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, we're kind of at the top of the hour. We definitely want to have you back so we can delve deeper into subjects like this, man. But before we end it, did you want to leave the audience with any closing thoughts?
Yeah. I think honestly, like working in big tech is great, and like having all the perks and all that of big tech is great, but like having real world experience and just applying yourself, and like working like at a job outside of academia is probably like the biggest thing that I can offer in terms of advice for trying to get into big tech. So I'll just leave on that thought.
Awesome.
Awesome. And just to close things out, what is your favorite 90s video game soundtrack?
Ooh, favorite 90s. Huh. I'm trying to think here. 90s. I don't have a good one off the top of my head, to be honest with you guys.
I would have to go with an RPG like Legend of Zelda. I think it's the third one, Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good point to end this one on. We appreciate you for stopping by, man.
Yeah, it's no problem. Thanks again for you guys for having me and having me talk.
Absolutely, no, it was a pleasure. It's all ours, man.
Definitely. Well, I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody.